When we started, which was in the year 1983, it was what you would call the legal equivalent of a mom and pop store. Two of us, few clerks, we started practice. We were very fortunate that we always were a little ahead of the curve and always had a little more clientele and a little more work than most people our size and age did. And then it just grew, and here's where we find ourselves today.
From those mom and pop origins, you've grown to being one of the most important legal firms now in India. What were the landmarks in that growth?
Well, all through there's been a steady stream of growth, but if there were a few landmarks that I could look at, then in my mind I would isolate the following. I think the first landmark came in the year 1987 when I met and took on Mr. VP Singh as a client. He then went on in the year 1989 to become the Prime Minister of the country. In 87, at that time, there was a huge political divide within India. There was VP Singh's group on one side and Rajiv Gandhi, that is the ruling government, on the other. And as a result of that clash, since we were his lawyers, we were his cutting edge insofar as all his litigation cases were, the firm and I got a huge profile. A lot of people met us, a lot of people wanted to meet us, and therefore that was, according to me, the first big leap that we had. The second big leap, if I look at it, would be in the year 1990-91 when I got both Indian Airlines and Air India, which were the national carriers, as clients. That gave us a whole different perspective to work. We had to expand our own base in order to cope with that work. And that, I think, gave me the second big leap, which then again took us into a higher league. The third one came when, I think, honestly speaking, the third one would be 1993 when Murdoch came to India, and then we were appointed as the lawyers for Star TV. Just as I suppose everywhere else, whenever he's entered in any country in the world, including America, when he came into India, there was a lot of controversy in its wake. And Star TV was the subject of a lot of litigation, a lot of cases, a lot of controversies. And we had to handle, across the board, many of the problems that Star had. And that gave us a huge profile, that gave us a huge amount of connectivity. It introduced us and put us in touch with a lot of media organizations, and that, I think, was the third landmark as far as we were concerned. And then the last, and I don't know whether the biggest, but the one other landmark that has come our way is that in early 2000 and onwards, the Tata Group came as our client, and they have sort of, to a large extent, singled us out as the firm that they prefer to use for litigation in our part of the country. And that has, of course, given us another fillip.
Because of the high profile of many of your clients, you've had to operate in the public space as well as concentrating on the bread and butter matter of the law. What has that taught you?
Well, first of all, the things that you have to remember is when you deal with all these high controversial cases is, first, you don't get scared of controversy. You have to deal with it, you have to tackle it head on. Secondly, in a large part of litigation, especially high-profile litigation today, a lot of it goes into the public domain. A lot of it is covered on TV, a lot of it is covered in the papers, and therefore it's very important, I felt, and we've always sort of, is to put your version out in a accessible form through TV interviews, through interviews to the press when asked, as to what your side of the case is. And you should ensure that it comes through in a reasonable fashion and is something that people can relate to. Nothing too complicated, just commonsensical. And so that's the second thing that we've always learned, that, you know, in these high-profile cases, you've just got to keep that part in mind also when you deal with the larger space that you're attending to.
You've been in business now for more than a quarter of a century. How has the legal scene changed in India over that time?
Hugely. But, I mean, it's changed in many different ways, but if I were to isolate three things, I would say the following. One, when I joined the bar, and even before that when I wanted to join the bar, essentially the practice of law was the practice of litigation. You did and handled clients that walked into a courtroom. That's changed. A large part of practice of law today has, at least in the big cities, Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, Calcutta, walked out of court and gone into other areas of non-litigation. So that's the first big change that we've noticed. And some of the big firms are really the firms which don't do much litigation, they only do the non-lit part. That's one. The second change has been in the practice of litigation itself. When we first started the profession, you really fundamentally looked at only the courts. And that's where you went. You went to the Supreme Court or the High Court, depending on where you were situated, or the District Court, depending on where your practice took you. But in recent times, there's been a plethora of new tribunals dealing with specialized subjects. For example, you have the TDSAT, which is the Telecom Tribunal. You have the SAT, which deals with the Securities Commission. You have the DRT, which deals with banks and recoveries of debt. You have, you're going to have the Competitive Commission coming up. So you have a whole series of tribunals. You have the Electricity Tribunal. So you have a whole series of tribunals, and that brings about their own attendant bars and their own attendant specialization. So very often you will have lawyers now who only specialize and largely practice in one forum, which is that tribunal.
In these difficult times all around the world, in all economies, how important is it to maintain a relationship with your clients?
It's important at any given point of time, in good times and in bad times. You can't not have a relationship with a client. I mean, it's foolish. Essentially, what are we? Lawyers are people who clients turn to in times of distress and in times of trouble. We're like doctors, but not in the medical field. So it's always important to have relationships with clients. With a relationship, I don't necessarily mean you have to wine or dine them, but they must have an understanding that you're accessible to them in their dark hours, and that you are reasonable with them in the manner in which you treat them.